In this podcast episode, historian James Holland explores the complex life and times of Adolf Hitler, tracing his early failures, his rise amid the turmoil of post-World War I Germany, and the interplay of social, political, and economic factors that culminated in the outbreak of World War II. The discussion covers Hitler's background, his ideological development, the broader context of early 20th century Europe, including the threat of communism, the dynamics of Nazi Germany's ascent to power, its militaristic campaigns, and the catastrophic consequences of its policies, including the Holocaust and the role of Germany's military leadership. James Holland begins by describing Hitler's troubled youth in Austria, near Linz, highlighting his repeated personal failures, particularly his unsuccessful attempts at becoming an artist. His paintings lacked vitality and soul, and his social difficulties contributed to a brooding resentment. This period was characterized by an absence of firmly formed political views, though anti-Semitism was already widespread across Europe. Serving in World War I provided Hitler a sense of belonging, camaraderie, and purpose he had previously lacked. His role as a lance corporal on the Western Front was marked by conspicuous courage, but he never rose beyond this modest rank. The dissolution of the war, especially Germany's defeat and the humiliating Treaty of Versailles, unleashed deep national trauma. Hitler ended the war recovering from a gas attack with psychological scars that fueled his later political agenda. After the war, Germany was left devastated, economically, socially, and politically. The Treaty of Versailles imposed severe reparations and territorial losses, breeding resentment and hatred among veterans and ordinary citizens alike. Hitler, now in Munich, was drawn into nationalist politics and propaganda aimed at countering the rise of communism, particularly following the brief Soviet republic established in Munich with prominent Jewish leadership. This period saw the emergence of the German Workers' Party, later renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP or Nazi Party, which attracted Hitler due to shared views and also provided him with a platform to hone his oratory skills. His speeches combined themes of betrayal, stab-in-the-back myth, nationalism, and racial ideology, establishing an us versus them worldview based on Volk and Front-Gemeinschaft, the racial and frontline community of true Germans, excluded Jews, Bolsheviks, and others whom he scapegoated for Germany's ills. Initially fringe and minor in electoral terms, the Nazi Party expanded slowly during the early 1920s amid the hyperinflation crisis and political chaos. The failed Beer Hall Putsch in 1923 resulted in Hitler's imprisonment, during which he authored Mein Kampf, laying out his ideological vision centered on racial purity, anti-Semitism, expansionism, Lebensraum, and the re-establishment of German power. His ideas stressed the need for living space in the East through territorial conquest, justified by both racist myths and strategic necessity. The Nazis developed paramilitary organizations, the SA and later the SS, to provide a militant identity and organizational discipline for their followers, engaging in violent street clashes with communists and others. The discussion emphasizes the significant threat communism and Bolshevism posed to many Europeans after the Russian Revolution, contributing to the polarization of politics. Communism was terrifying for conservatives and nationalists, not only due to its radical egalitarianism, but also its anti-religious, anti-nationalist dimensions. Although Nazism and communism shared some superficial traits like totalitarianism and anti-liberalism, their core ideologies diverged fundamentally. Nazis embraced hierarchy, racial purity, and elites, while communism espoused proletarian equality. Yet the political landscape resembled a horseshoe, with both extremes seeking to attract the disaffected masses by offering strong, definitive identities as alternatives to the failing democratic systems. The Weimar Republic experienced a period of economic recovery and relative stability during the late 1920s, aided by American loans and plans like the Dawes and Young plans, which restructured reparations and stabilized currency. This golden 20s era saw cultural vibrancy and industrial growth in Germany, especially in Berlin's liberal and artistic society. Despite Nazi propaganda that vilified the Weimar Republic as decadent and weak, this era was not characterized by mass political support for the Nazis, who remained a small, marginalized force. This economic recovery and social flourishing limited the Nazis' appeal during these years. The 1929 Wall Street crash precipitated a global economic crisis with catastrophic effects on Germany's economy. The subsequent Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, a protectionist measure by the U.S., exacerbated the worldwide trade collapse, cutting off vital loans and exports that Germany depended upon. Unemployment and social unrest surged. Chancellor Heinrich Brüning's austerity policies deepened the crisis, alienating large segments of the population. This widespread disillusionment created a political void, with many Germans turning away from traditional democratic parties toward radical alternatives, chiefly the Nazis and communists, seeking solutions to their hardships. Learning from earlier failures and recognizing the power of modern propaganda and mass communication, Hitler shifted from attempted violent takeover to seeking legitimacy through elections and mass political campaigning. He toured Germany widely, using airplanes, mass rallies, and radios, which were made affordable and widespread, to spread his message. His speeches trafficked in themes of national betrayal and promised revival through unity, racial purity, and militarization. As the Weimar government faltered, especially under the weight of economic crisis, Nazi electoral support surged to over 30% at its peak. However, internal political elites believed they could control Hitler, ultimately appointing him chancellor in 1933 as a lesser evil compared to communism, a decision with disastrous consequences. After Hitler became chancellor, the Nazi regime rapidly dismantled the Weimar Republic's democratic institutions through the Enabling Act and subsequent crackdown on opposition parties. Early on, the Nazis propagated anti-Semitic policies designed to exclude Jews from social, economic, and political life, but mass extermination was not yet official policy. Instead, forced emigration, social isolation, and economic disenfranchisement were implemented. Meanwhile, public works and rearmament programs helped reduce unemployment and gave the appearance of national revival. Propaganda orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels presented the regime and Hitler as messianic figures who would restore Germany's glory and expand its territory to incorporate all ethnic Germans living outside post-Versailles borders. Germany began defying the Treaty of Versailles by rebuilding its military, including the Luftwaffe and the Wehrmacht. Initial expansions, such as remilitarizing the Rhineland, the Anschluss with Austria, and the annexation of Sudetenland, were met with limited resistance from Western powers, emboldening the regime. The Munich Agreement's appeasement in 1938 confirmed to Hitler that Britain and France were reluctant to confront German aggression militarily. However, Germany's military capabilities were still limited compared to potential adversaries, and much of the apparent strength was built on fragile economic and logistical foundations. The invasions of Czechoslovakia and Poland in 1939 triggered World War II, with Britain and France declaring war. The German Wehrmacht initially achieved stunning victories through innovative combined arms tactics known as Blitzkrieg, characterized by fast-moving panzer divisions and effective communication via radios. These tactics overwhelmed Poland, the Low Countries, and France by mid-1940. However, Germany's military was not fully mechanized and remained reliant on horses and outdated infrastructure. The defeat of Britain in the Battle of Britain failed, resulting in the postponement of Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. This failure exposed limitations in German air, naval, and logistical capabilities, even as the regime claimed overwhelming dominance. In 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, aiming both for territorial conquest and the destruction of Bolshevism and Judaism. Initial operations saw tremendous advances in Soviet losses, but the scale of Soviet resources, harsh geography, and logistical challenges eventually stalled the German advance. The failure to capture key cities like Moscow and Leningrad marked a turning point. Hitler's strategic miscalculations, refusal to heed senior military advisors, and ideological zealotry contributed to overextension. The entrance of the United States to the war after Pearl Harbor further sealed Germany's strategic predicament. While the Nazis' racial policies were clear from the regime's outset, the systematic genocide of Jews and other groups evolved progressively, accelerating markedly after the invasion of the Soviet Union. Einsatzgruppen mobile killing squads conducted mass shootings in occupied Eastern Europe. At the same time, the brutal occupation policies, mass murder of perceived partisans, and the construction of death camps such as Auschwitz facilitated industrial-scale extermination. The transition to extermination camps and gas chambers arose in part due to the psychological burden on perpetrators and logistical considerations. Allied knowledge of the Holocaust was partial and incomplete during the war, and responses were often constrained by military priorities and uncertainties over how best to intervene. Post-war narratives sometimes depict German generals as reluctant or duped followers. However, James Holland stresses that most senior military leaders were deeply complicit in Nazi crimes and ideology. They supported Hitler's wars and embraced the racist and annihilationist policies, often enthusiastically. The Wehrmacht cooperated with SS units in mass killings and the repression of civilian populations. Many commanders failed to question orders or act to remove Hitler, despite opportunities. Their belief in Nazi ideology and military success blinded them to strategic realities and moral imperatives. Albert Speer, Hitler's favored architect and later Minister of Armaments, is examined as a notable figure embodying personal ambition intertwined with complicity. Speer designed grandiose Nazi architectural projects and later managed wartime production. Although he claimed ignorance or distancing from Nazi atrocities, detailed research and testimonies reveal his deep involvement in forced labor and the regime's brutal policies. His post-war portrayal as the good Nazi has been widely challenged. The podcast concludes by drawing parallels between the conditions leading to the rise of Nazism and contemporary global challenges, such as economic instability and political polarization. James Holland emphasizes the importance of understanding patterns in history, such as how economic crises can undermine democracies and open the door for extremist movements, while acknowledging the unique contexts of different eras. He advocates for investment and proactive policies during economic downturns, highlighting the failures of austerity in the Weimar Republic. The discussion underscores the continuing relevance of history to prevent repetition of past catastrophes.